The Imperium of man was never built on faith alone. It was built on fear, the kind that corrodes the soul and blinds civilizations to the price of their survival. When the Emperor forged his vision of a unified mankind, he did not create gods or angels. He created tools, weapons, flesh forged in perfection, stripped of doubt, mercy, and choice. The Astartes were not born, they were manufactured, sculpted in laboratories, baptized in blood, and told they were humanity's final hope. But what happens when your hope is built out of horror? From their first breath, they were never allowed to be human. Every gene-spliced cell, every organ grafted into their bodies, tore them further away from what they were meant to protect. Their blood ran cold, their hearts pumped faster than nature intended, and their minds were shackled by loyalty so absolute it devoured their individuality. They became something beyond human, and in doing so, less than it. But the tragedy of the Space Marines isn't their transformation. It's the purpose behind it. The Emperor sought to save mankind from chaos, from the corruption that festers in every dark corner of the galaxy. Yet to fight monsters, he created monsters. The irony of the 41st millennium is that the Emperor's greatest victory, his legions, were also his greatest sin. For in their perfection, he removed the one thing that made humanity worth saving, its soul. Imagine it, billions of years of evolution, reduced to a blueprint, edited and rewritten by the hands of a god who could not trust his own species. The legions became instruments, bound by oaths they did not choose, worshipping a father who never intended to love them. And when that father fell, their faith shattered with him, leaving behind warriors who knew nothing but war, creatures who no longer understood peace, who could no longer live without battle. They say the Space Marines are immortal, but immortality means nothing when you've already lost your purpose. Every crusade, every victory, every burning world under their boots is just another echo in a cycle that never ends. They were made to protect humanity, and yet, with each battle, they destroy a little more of what remains of it. You see, the true horror of the Space Marines isn't found in their enemies. It's found in their design, the realization that humanity looked into the abyss, and instead of turning away, it decided to build a mirror. And in that reflection, it saw not salvation, but its own extinction wearing armor. With that said, let's go back to where it all began, to the moment the Emperor decided that humanity alone was not enough. If you stay until the end of this story, you'll understand why the very creation of the Space Marines doomed the Imperium before it even began, and how the Emperor's dream was destined to collapse under the weight of his own ambition. Long before the galaxy burned with war, before the Astartes marched across the stars, the Emperor looked upon humanity and saw weakness. Not just in body, but in spirit, the petty rivalries, the fear of the unknown, the corruption that spread faster than reason. He believed that to save humanity, he had to control it. That order could only be born from obedience. But to make that happen, he needed something greater than men, something that could not question, hesitate, or fail. And so began the gamble, a creation that would define the next 10,000 years of suffering. The Primarchs were his first masterpiece, 20 demigods crafted in his image. Each one was designed to embody a fragment of his will, strength, loyalty, intellect, ruthlessness. They were meant to be perfect generals, extensions of his mind across the stars. But perfection is a lie. The warp, that chaotic sea of thought and emotion, scattered them across the galaxy, as if the universe itself rejected the Emperor's arrogance. Yet he didn't stop. He couldn't. The Great Crusade had to continue, and humanity had to be united. So he built the Space Marines, lesser copies of his lost sons, molded from human stock and gene forged with the remnants of the Primarch's essence. They were engineered soldiers, stripped of doubt, sculpted into living weapons. And when they marched, worlds trembled. Empires fell. Humanity expanded, not through diplomacy, but through fire and fear. But here's the cruel truth. The Emperor's creation was never meant to serve humanity. It was meant to serve him. Every Space Marine bore the echo of his control, loyalty not to the species they protected, but to the God who denied being one. The Astartes fought, conquered, and killed in his name, believing they were saving mankind, when in truth, they were enslaving it to his vision. The gamble worked, for a time. Humanity was united, yes. But unity achieved through domination is a brittle thing. When belief is forced, it fractures. When loyalty is demanded, it dies the moment the master falls. And the Emperor's creations, no matter how powerful, could not escape the flaw written into their very souls. They were built to obey, not to choose. And choice, that single, fragile spark, is what defines humanity. The Emperor removed it in pursuit of perfection. And that is why his empire could only end in betrayal. The Space Marines were not born, they were constructed. Every cell of their body was altered, every instinct reshaped. Fear was replaced with aggression. Compassion with obedience. Where once there had been men, there now stood beings who could tear through steel with their bare hands, but could no longer feel the warmth of a simple human emotion. They were perfection in the physical sense, yes, but spiritually. They were hollow. The very thing that gave humanity strength, its empathy, its ability to choose, had been carved out of them in the name of efficiency. And that's where the cracks began to form. Perfection doesn't breed loyalty, it breeds pride. The Primarchs, the genetic fathers of the Space Marines, each carried not only the Emperor's power but also his flaws, magnified 100-fold. One by one, they began to see themselves not as servants of a greater cause, but as gods in their own right. Horus, the War Master, the Emperor's favored son, became the embodiment of that flaw, a creation who loved his father so deeply that he was destroyed by the realization that he had only ever been a tool. When Horus turned against the Emperor, it wasn't just rebellion. It was inevitable. Because how long can something built to obey endure without questioning why? The seeds of betrayal were sown in the moment they were made. The legions that once united humanity now tore it apart, each one believing they were fighting for the truth. But there was no truth, only the shadow of the Emperor's lie. His dream of perfection had created an empire that could not sustain imperfection, and in doing so, he doomed it to endless war. Think about it, every world the Space Marines conquered, every heretic they burned, every civilization they saved, all in the name of the Imperium, none of it was about peace. It was about control. The Emperor believed that peace without obedience was chaos. But obedience without freedom is just another form of death. And so, his perfect warriors became the instruments of eternal suffering, angels of death that could never stop killing because they were never allowed to be anything else. Even after Horus fell, even after the Emperor was entombed upon his golden throne, the Space Marines continued to fight. Not for hope, not for humanity, but because that's all they knew how to do. War had become their only purpose. And a life without purpose is something they were never built to endure. Their perfection became their prison, a design so flawless it trapped them forever in a loop of blood and obedience. So yes, the Space Marines are powerful. They are gods among men. But what is the worth of godhood if it comes at the cost of a soul? What is the value of perfection if it destroys everything that makes life worth living? The Emperor believed he could save humanity by erasing its flaws. Instead, he erased its humanity. They were made to endure what ordinary men could not. Disease cannot touch them. Time does not claim them. Even pain is muted beneath layers of engineered resilience. But beneath all that power lies a silent horror, the unending awareness of purpose lost. For what happens when the war never ends, yet your reason for fighting fades into dust? What happens when you were built to die for a dream that no longer exists? When the Emperor fell, his dream did not die, it calcified. The Imperium he left behind became a monument of stagnation, a decaying corpse worshipping its own reflection. And at its heart, the Space Marines remain, immortal warriors who cannot die, serving a God who cannot speak, fighting for a truth that no longer means anything. They are the ghosts of a war that should have ended 10,000 years ago, yet somehow, it still rages. To the average citizen of the Imperium, a space marine is a god, a savior in armor, a divine protector. But to the marine himself, there is only emptiness. He feels neither joy nor rest. His memories stretch across centuries of endless battles, where every world looks the same and every victory feels hollow. Entire generations are born and die under their watch, but for the Astartes, time blurs into a single, unbroken moment of violence. Immortality, for them, is not a blessing. It is a sentence. Even their brotherhood, the one thing that once bound them, fades over time. Battle after battle, their numbers dwindle, and their memories of who they once were dissolve into fragments. They are surrounded by mortals who fear them, priests who deify them, and bureaucrats who use them as pawns. The irony is bitter. The most powerful beings in the galaxy are slaves to a decaying empire, commanded by faith instead of reason, worshipping a god who sits upon a throne of wires and rot. And still, they fight. Because they cannot do anything else. There is no retirement for a space marine. No peace. No end. Their immortality has stripped them of choice, the same flaw that has haunted them since their creation. They do not know how to stop. They cannot learn to live. They exist in an endless cycle of war, driven not by duty or faith, but by the echoes of a command that was given 10,000 years ago and never rescinded: protect humanity. But what humanity is left to protect? The Imperium has become a nightmare parody of what it once was, a machine that feeds upon its own people, consuming hope to fuel survival. The Space Marines have become its instruments, perpetuating the very suffering they were made to end. Their immortality ensures that this cycle will continue forever, a galaxy trapped in the jaws of its own perfection. And here lies the final cruelty: even death does not free them. Those who fall in battle are remembered as saints, martyrs of an empire that forgot why they were created in the first place. Their names are chanted by zealots who would never understand the torment behind the armor. To the galaxy, they are eternal heroes. But to themselves, they are prisoners of a god's ambition, condemned to live forever in a universe that will never forgive them for existing. When the Emperor created the Astartes, he believed he was saving humanity from its own self-destruction. In truth, he was only teaching it to destroy itself more efficiently. Every gene-enhanced warrior, every conquered world, every sermon of obedience whispered by the Imperium's priests, all of it served the illusion that the galaxy could be tamed. But chaos cannot be tamed. It can only be endured. And in trying to cage it, the Emperor built a prison not just for mankind, but for the very idea of freedom. The Space Marines were made to be saviors, but they became symbols of despair. Wherever they go, they bring silence, not peace. Order, not justice. They burn worlds to protect the Imperium, but what remains after their crusades are ashes, ruins, and the echo of prayers to a god who will never answer. They do not liberate, they purge. And the people they fight to protect kneel in terror, not gratitude. In a universe ruled by fear, salvation has no meaning. The true horror is that the Space Marines do not see this. They cannot. Their minds are locked in devotion, sculpted to believe that everything they do, every atrocity, every slaughter, serves a greater good. But there is no greater good. There is only survival, stretched out over 10,000 years of endless death. They are blind angels, wielding divine fire in a universe that stopped believing in light long ago. And yet, there is something deeply tragic about them. For beneath all the armor, beneath the indoctrination and the gene-forged perfection, fragments of humanity still remain. Some remember what it was like to feel. Some question the silence of their God. A few even wonder if the Emperor was wrong, if the price of his salvation was too high. But such thoughts are heresy. And in the Imperium, heresy is the last trace of free will. The fallacy of salvation is not that it fails, it's that it convinces us to keep trying, even when it destroys everything we are. The Emperor believed he could save humanity by removing its flaws, but he only created a new kind of suffering, one that cannot end. The Space Marines are proof of this. They are the living embodiment of humanity's greatest mistake, the attempt to perfect what was never meant to be perfect. And so, the cycle continues. The Imperium worships the past, fights for the future, and forgets to live in the present. The Space Marines fight wars they no longer understand, in the name of a god they can no longer hear. And humanity, the very species they were made to protect, remains caught in the crossfire, praying for salvation from the very monsters that were created to save them. In the end, the question is no longer why the Space Marines were made. It is why we still believe they should exist. Because as long as they do, humanity will never move forward. It will only keep repeating the same mistake, mistaking obedience for peace, perfection for progress, and control for salvation. Perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all, that in trying to conquer the darkness, we became it. 10,000 years have passed since the Emperor's fall, and still, the Space Marines march. They fight wars across the stars that will never end. They purge worlds in the name of purity, even as the Imperium itself rots from within. They are relics of an age that believed in miracles, now forced to serve a god who has been silent for millennia. Their armor shines, but the souls beneath it are dimming, warriors turned into myths, myths turned into tools of fear. Every generation of humanity that rises under the Imperium grows up in their shadow. Children are told stories of the noble Astartes, the angels of the Emperor, protectors of mankind. But those stories are lies meant to comfort the weak. Because the truth is far darker, the Space Marines were never meant to protect mankind's spirit, only its survival. And what is survival without meaning? What is life when it exists only to serve death? The galaxy itself remembers. Every planet scarred by orbital bombardment, every civilization wiped away in the name of the Emperor, every cry for mercy that fell on deaf ears, these are their monuments. The Imperium calls them saints, but the stars know them as executioners. And even now, across a million worlds, they still march, still obey, still kill in the name of a dream long dead. Their legacy is not salvation. It is silence. Yet somewhere, buried deep in their fractured memories, lies something almost human. A flicker of doubt, a whisper of regret. Some Space Marines begin to question, not out of rebellion, but out of weariness, a quiet understanding that the war will never end, because it was never meant to. The Emperor's greatest truth was not his power, but his fear. He feared what humanity could become without control. And that fear lives on through his sons, through every blade they raise, every world they burn, every brother they bury. But there is something even more terrifying, the realization that the galaxy cannot exist without them anymore. The Imperium is too vast, too broken, too consumed by its own decay. Without the Astartes, it would collapse entirely. Humanity depends on its monsters now. The very thing that damned them is what keeps them alive. It is a cycle without beginning or end, a legacy that feeds upon itself. That is why the Space Marines can never be unmade. They are both the disease and the cure. The embodiment of the Emperor's failure and humanity's dependence on that failure. They were never meant to be immortal, yet they have outlived their purpose, becoming symbols of everything they were created to destroy. They are the eternal guardians of a tomb, the tomb of human potential, sealed by their own perfection. And so, their legacy endures, not in glory, but in despair. A reminder that sometimes, the greatest evil is born not from hatred, but from love. The Emperor loved humanity so much that he could not let it be free. And the Space Marines, in their blind devotion, will spend eternity paying for that love. When the Emperor forged his legions, he believed he was creating perfection. But perfection was never the point. The point was control. He wanted to shape mankind into something that could never disobey him, never question him, never stray from his vision. But in doing so, he created something that no longer belonged to humanity at all. The Space Marines are proof that the line between savior and tyrant is thinner than a whisper, and once it's crossed, there's no going back. Look at them now, ageless, merciless, unchanging. Their devotion is pure, but purity is not a virtue, it's a cage. They no longer fight for the Emperor's dream, because that dream died with him. They fight because they were made to. They fight because they cannot stop. Every battle they win is another step deeper into the grave of their own purpose. And still, the galaxy calls them holy. Still, the Imperium prays to them as if they are gods. But what kind of god never sleeps, never laughs, never lives? What kind of god forgets what it means to be human? That is the true horror of the Space Marines, not their power, not their immortality, but their emptiness. They are the void the Emperor left behind, filled with duty and rage. They are living proof that in trying to perfect mankind, he destroyed its heart. And now, the Imperium worships the shell that remains, a galaxy-wide religion built on obedience, built on fear, built on the bones of what could have been. And yet, somewhere in that silence, there's still a question. A question that no Space Marine can answer, and no human dares to ask. What if the Emperor was wrong? What if humanity was never meant to be perfected, only to endure? Because endurance is not the absence of weakness. It's the acceptance of it. It's the strength to fail, to learn, to rise again. The Space Marines cannot fail. And that is why they can never grow. They can only continue, forever trapped between godhood and nothingness. This is the final truth. The Space Marines should have never been made. Not because they are evil, but because they are proof that mankind lost faith in itself. They were born from fear, the fear that humanity was too fragile, too chaotic, too flawed to survive on its own. But it is those very flaws, doubt, pain, compassion, that give humanity its strength. Without them, we are nothing but machines wearing flesh. The Emperor tried to erase chaos, but chaos is life. And in rejecting it, he created death in its purest form, a death that walks, breathes, and kills in his name. The Space Marines are the death made manifest, and as long as they exist, the dream of freedom will never truly live. So maybe the real question isn't why the Space Marines should have never been made. Maybe it's whether humanity can ever unmake them, or if we're already too far gone. Because once you trade your soul for survival, there's no victory left to win. 10,000 years after the Emperor was entombed upon his golden throne, the galaxy has forgotten what it was even fighting for. The Imperium worships the husk of its creator, feeding billions of lives into the flames of his machinery just to keep the illusion of stability alive. Worlds burn, faith spreads like disease, progress has become heresy. And yet, through all of it, the Space Marines endure, silent, eternal, unchanging. They are the echoes of their maker's will, repeating the same command forever: protect humanity. But what humanity remains to protect? Each chapter follows its own creed now, its own twisted interpretation of the Emperor's dream. Some have become zealots, preaching the purity of flesh and soul. Others have turned inward, fighting endless wars against enemies that barely exist. A few have begun to question. But even their doubts are drowned beneath the roar of bolter fire and the endless chant of war. Because in the Imperium, thinking is treason, and treason is death. And death, for a Space Marine, is the only mercy they can no longer remember how to ask for. The Mechanicus, the priests of the machine god, revere them as divine constructs, walking relics of a bygone age. They worship the armor, the weapon, the process that made them. To them, the Astartes are proof that divinity can be engineered. But they never ask whether the machine should have been built in the first place. They maintain the shell, polish the relic, and whisper prayers to circuits that no longer understand what purpose they serve. The Space Marines are not gods, they are ghosts of machinery, echoes of design, trapped in the endless hum of a universe that mistakes motion for meaning. And through it all, the Emperor's lie lives on, the lie that control can bring order, that obedience can bring peace. Every world conquered in his name is another gear in the endless mechanism of the Imperium. Every victory is another layer of rust on the dream of human freedom. And the Space Marines, those perfect creations, are the pistons that keep it moving. They fight without question. They kill without hesitation. They exist without end. Because the machine does not stop, it never stops, and neither can they. But perhaps the most tragic truth is this: they don't want to stop. They have forgotten how to be anything else. The few who remember what came before, the faces of brothers lost, the laughter of a time when they were still men, are haunted by it. Immortality has stripped them of everything but memory, and memory has become their curse. They are the ghosts of a god's ambition, condemned to wander forever between what they were made to be and what they can never become again. So the galaxy keeps turning. The Imperium decays but refuses to die. The chaos gods laugh from the void, feeding on the fear that sustains it all. And the Space Marines, the Emperor's angels, march on, immortal, unfeeling, unchanging. They were made to protect humanity, but now they protect only the shadow of his empire. The machine endures because they endure. And somewhere, buried deep beneath the static of eternity, one question remains unanswered. Who will protect humanity from its protectors? That is the echo of the machine god. The sound of perfection devouring itself. The legacy of a species that tried to master creation and instead became enslaved by it. The Space Marines should have never been made, because in making them, the Emperor ensured that humanity would never truly live again. One day, perhaps 1,000 years from now, perhaps 1,000,000, even the Imperium will finally fall. The great hive cities will crumble into dust. The cathedrals built in the Emperor's name will crack and sink beneath oceans of forgotten worlds. The golden throne will dim, its light fading like a candle burned to nothing. And when that happens, when the machinery stops, the last of the Space Marines will still stand. Alone, watching the stars go dark. He will not remember why he was created. He will not remember the Emperor, or Terra, or the Great Crusade. He will only know that he was made to fight, to protect, to kill. And as the galaxies fall silent around him, he will finally understand, there is nothing left to protect. Humanity's final guardian, standing in a universe that no longer remembers the word human. That is the destiny written into their blood, to outlive the species they were meant to save. To carry the burden of perfection until perfection has no meaning. They will not die. They will simply fade, like echoes in the void, like the hum of a machine that has forgotten its purpose. And when the last Astartes falls, the universe will finally be free of the Emperor's dream. But that freedom will come too late. The price will have been everything. And yet, perhaps, that is how it was always meant to be. The Emperor thought he could command the stars, that he could bend the laws of existence through will alone. But no creation escapes its creator's flaw. The Space Marines were never a testament to his genius, they were monuments to his fear. His need to control what could never be controlled. His refusal to trust in the very thing he sought to protect, the human spirit. The story of the Space Marines is not just a warning for the 41st millennium, it is a mirror held up to us all. Because the moment we decide that imperfection is weakness, we begin the same descent. The moment we choose obedience over understanding, power over empathy, control over freedom, we build our own legions. Maybe not of flesh and armor, but of ideology and pride. And those legions will destroy us just the same. The quiet end is not a scream. It's a whisper, the whisper of realization. That salvation was never about gods or empires or eternal war. It was about the fragile, fleeting beauty of being human, flawed, temporary, alive. Something the Emperor forgot. Something the Space Marines were never allowed to be. And something, perhaps, that we must never forget. Because when the noise fades, when the wars are done and the stars grow cold, what will remain is not the glory of conquest, but the memory of what was lost trying to reach it. And maybe, just maybe, that final silence will be the first sound of peace. Somewhere, on a forgotten world orbiting a dying sun, a single suit of power armor stands half buried in ash. The body within it long since turned to dust. But the armor still hums faintly, as if remembering. The machine spirit whispers ancient names: Dorn, Guilliman, Sanguinius. Legends spoken like prayers to no one. And then, silence again. That silence is the Imperium's legacy, a monument to a species that reached too high, grasped at godhood, and lost itself to the stars. But here's the truth that endures: the Emperor's dream was never just about conquest. Beneath the layers of war and worship, beneath the blood and betrayal, there was something fragile, a desire to save mankind from itself. He saw humanity's potential, but he did not trust its heart. So he built the Space Marines to be its shield. What he never realized was that a shield, once raised, can never embrace. It can only divide, and that division cost humanity everything. Yet, even after the fires burned out, even after the last star faded, something remains. Not the Imperium, not the Astartes, but the idea, the memory, that humanity once dared to reach for more. That, perhaps, somewhere deep in that endless void, the human soul still drifts, waiting to be reborn. Waiting to try again. Because that is the paradox of creation: every ending carries the seed of its beginning. The Emperor tried to craft eternity, but all he made was the cycle, the eternal return of ambition, fear, and hope. And maybe, just maybe, that's not a curse. Maybe that's what it means to be human. To fail endlessly, and still rise. To build gods, destroy them, and then dream again in their ashes. The Space Marines will never return, but their echo will never fade. It will live on in the memory of struggle, in the yearning to become something greater, in the endless question that drives all existence: what if we could be more? That question is older than the Imperium, older than the stars, older than time itself. It's what defines us. It's what dooms us. And it's what makes us eternal. So, when you think of the Space Marines, do not think of them as monsters or martyrs. Think of them as the reflection of what humanity might become when it loses faith in its own humanity. Remember them not as heroes, but as warnings carved into the fabric of eternity, that the pursuit of perfection without compassion will always lead to ruin. And in that ruin, listen closely, for the faint hum still echoing through the cosmos is not the sound of machines or gods. It's the whisper of humanity's oldest truth: that we were never meant to be perfect, only to be alive.